Gospel Tangents is supported by users like you. Please support us at gospeltangents.com or on Patreon. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Hey, here's a throwback episode to Steve Mayfield. Steve was the Salt Lake City police photographer and also the photographer at the Mormon History Association, John Whitmer Historical Association, and Sunstone. So he was kind of a fixture at all the conferences. Sadly, he passed away last Saturday, the day before Easter. And so I thought I would put together the entire episode with Steve. He's kind of a crime aficionado, of course, would be working with the Salt Lake Police Department. We're going to talk about good and bad FBI agents. That includes the guy who arrested Patty Hearst, as well as Robert Hansen, one of the most notorious spies in U.S. history. So he happened to be a Mormon. So we'll talk about that in our next conversation with Steve. And I just wanted to remember Steve. Sadly, he's with us no more. And so I'm going to miss you, Steve. So anyway, thought you might enjoy this interesting episode on Mormons and crime. Well, welcome to Gospel Tangents.
Thank you.
I'm excited to have Steve Mayfield here. He is a documentation collector.
Yes.
And we're going to talk a little bit about Mark Hofmann. We're going to talk a little bit about the Meadows Massacre. We're going to talk a little bit about the FBI and Mormons.
Yes.
Which I think will be a lot of fun.
Yes.
So Steve has some amazing stories. And so why don't you give us a little bit about your background?
Okay.
How did you get involved in collecting?
Oh, gee. Well, I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. For those interested in genealogy, I'm a seventh generation Latter-day Saint. So my family history goes back all the way back to Ohio and one family line in Nauvoo. And I've always had an interest in history. When I was in high school, my desire was to be a history teacher, specifically maybe teach seminary or institute. But when I was a senior in high school, this is way back in 1974, most people were even around, we had one of these field trips to San Francisco, and it included, Golden Gate Park, the Chinese Tea Garden, an unofficial trip to the Haydash Ferry, for those who remember that area, and also a tour of the FBI office. And I just fell in love with what people in the FBI did, all that work, that I wanted to become the next Ethel Zillowitz Jr., who happened to be the star of the TV show FBI back during the 60s. After I graduated high school, I served my mission in Colorado and Nebraska. And in late 1972, I was assigned to way out east to Grand Island, Nebraska, which is kind of hard for a person used to mountains when it's all flatland and wintry. One of the members of the local LDS district presidency out there was also the local FBI agent. So we had a number of conversations, and I indicated my interest in working with the FBI, and so he suggested, well, get hired on as a clerk or clerical position with the Bureau, and then get a college degree, and then you might become an agent. So we put the paperwork in, and I came home in February of 73, and then by July I received my appointment to work as a file clerk in San Francisco. Was there for 4 years. Of course, all this time I'm worried, I love history, but yet I'm in law enforcement. How can I intermingle? Well, my whole working career has been in law enforcement, but I seem to have come across historical occurrences in each of the agencies I worked for. When I was at the FBI, I was there during an attempt assassination of President Gerald Ford. But more importantly, I was there during a very well-known case, this little kidnap case you might have heard of, Patty Hearst. I wasn't an agent, but I was involved in that in the fact that I was assigned to the Berkeley office of the FBI where the kidnapping occurred for about 3 or 4 months. And then I came back to San Francisco. I was there the day she was arrested and brought in.
Okay, well, let's back up a little bit, because I'm sure, even, I'm not going to tell you how old I am. I'm older than I want to admit. But even for me, which I'm sure some people think, wow, he's an old man. I don't know the Patty Hearst story that well. So let's back up and talk a little bit about that. So I believe her father was actually more famous than she was.
Yes, well, her grandfather, the Hearst Corporation, which they're newspaper people. They owned one of the San Francisco papers, very wealthy family. They have the Hearst Castle down in Southern California, which is, you can't buy it if you even tried. And she was a little 19-year-old college student.
So let's talk about, William Hearst, is that what his name was?
Yeah, William Hearst.
So he was kind of the Bill Gates of his day, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So he was a super rich guy.
Had these newspapers.
Had a bunch of newspapers.
Right.
And then let's talk a little bit of, wasn't it called the Symbionese Army?
Symbionese Liberation Army.
So tell me about that first.
They were a group of radicals that were organized out of the prison system back in the 60s into the 70s. Started by a black radical by the name of Donald DeFreeze. He incorporated some white folk around him who were radical, and this was a time when you had actual physical violence being portrayed. A couple of these members of the SLA killed the school superintendent at Oakland, Marcus Foster, a guy named Russell Little and Joseph Romero, and they were caught. They committed, the SLA did a lot of other things, but they had a list of some violent acts they were due. One of them was to kidnap. Well, Patty is living with her boyfriend in Berkeley, going to school. They show up one day and break into the house and kidnap her. Boom. Well, it's, we want money, we want reputation, we want notoriety.
So this group, the Symbian Lebanese Army, were they just just an anarchist group?
Yes.
Or what? They just
radical,
they just
terrorists.
wanted to create chaos.
Yes,
basically.
terrorists.
They didn't really have any strategic, big long-term goals.
Political, help for the poor, help for the minorities, but just and need to raise money. They were trying to overthrow the government, but you had a small group of maybe 8 people.
Okay.
Donald Freeze and these whole bunch of these white kids, white young folk. Bill Harrod. Now there was back in February of this year, CNN did a 6-day special. Yeah.
Yes.
And so one of the people interviewed was this William Taylor Harris. He was one of the people involved with that whole thing. He's been to prison, out, and whatever. So she was gone for a good period of time.
So let's back up. So the idea was this is just kind of a chaos group, right?
Yeah.
And they just wanted to sow chaos. How can we sow chaos? Oh, we'll kidnap the richest man's daughter in the world. That's basically what happened.
Well, a very rich man and a very well-known person. And slowly she would do these tape recordings that they would go to the media. Mom and dad. Patty Hearst would do these tape recordings. At first, she's a victim. But over time, she started changing to where, from being a victim, now she joins up with them. Now they're wanting money and they're running around doing various things. They did some bank robberies. Somebody was killed in one of the bank robberies. But now she's part of the radical group.
And she's part of the group that robbed the bank.
Yes.
Okay, so
now she's gone from
victim
to a member
now
of the
perpetrator.
Yes, and now she comes up. They gave her the name of Tanya. They all have their little names. So that's why you have here. This is a copy of the wanted poster.
A little higher. Okay. There's Patty Hearst right there.
And this is because
I think she actually didn't like the name Patty. I heard that on that CNN thing you were talking about. She liked to go by Patricia.
Patricia, yeah. But this is after she committed the bank robbery. So now you have a problem because she's a victim from a kidnapping, but now she's wanted for bank robbery and all these other things. So they've committed some crimes. They decide to go down to Southern California, which was probably the mistake. They'd stayed in the Bay Area where there was this radical movement. They had safe houses. They had friends that would support them. They went to LA, completely different environment. Tried to get in down there, and that's when they got caught in one of these suburbs of LA, and the police found them, and they had the shootout where the house burned and killed her. But Patty wasn't with them. The Harrises and Patricia Hearst were in LA, but they weren't there at that case where all these other members of the SLA were killed. And then Patty and the Harrises went back east, came back out, and eventually the FBI, and of course the FBI was criticized very harshly because, why can't you find her? Why can't you find her? But the FBI just started connecting the dots. Who we know knew Donald DeFreeze, who knew these other people, who were their friends, and eventually they connected the Celaya family, and they said, we know where they live. So they would do surveillance on these homes, and they saw the Harrises, and they saw Patty. And then one day they did the rush, they arrested him. Now, my interest obviously because I work for them, but also because there is a Mormon connection with the FBI in this case. The supervisor of the squad that handled bank robberies and kidnapping was a guy named Brian Wheeler, who at the time of the kidnapping was a member of the San Francisco Sunset Ward Bishopric. when they divided and made a special squad of agents just to work on that case, one of the agents was a guy named Jason Moulton. He is LDS, and he's one of the agents that arrested Patty Hearst. And on this CNN special, he's the FBI agent they interview on it. Jason retired about 15 years ago as the assistant special agent in charge of the FBI in Seattle. About 5 years ago, he and his wife served a mission out in Kentucky, short-term mission. So, but you had a number of other agents in the San Francisco division that worked on that case. Again, I had the involvement because I was in the Berkeley office. After she was arrested, myself and other clerks spent a whole week looking in all the evidence and all the materials they picked up. Then I had an opportunity on 2 occasions to go up and sit in on the trial. And I have sat a couple rows right behind Patty and her attorney, F. Lee Bailey.
Oh, really?
Yes.
The OJ lawyer.
Yes, which I learned that he was not much of a attorney at that time. And I've never been impressed with him. But so that was intimately involved in that thing. So that was these historical events. I'm saying, well, it's increased by history, and of course, that's when I started doing what you see around me. Is being a documentation collector. I collect newspaper clippings and things off the internet. I will tape record things off the TV and radio. That was a label that George Throckmorton gave to me. I'm not a document collector per se, in dealing with old documents, but they're connected because I collect these things now.
So you have a lot of newspaper clippings
Yes.
and things like that, and recordings.
And recordings. And a lot of this stuff has been donated to BYU. Since 2004, I've been donating my collection down there. And I'll share with other people. We were talking about Matt Harris. Well, I periodically also...
Well, let me back up. Before we do that, I noticed that that wanted poster you have is autographed, it looks like.
Well,
can you tell us who that autograph is?
Well, it says Patricia Hearst. The problem is this is not an actual. This is not an actual. This is an original one here. This one is a photo.
Oh, it's a photo of the original.
And I don't know if that's a real autograph or not because there are some differences.
We got to talk to George Throckmorton to figure out.
I probably have to show it. I just bought it because I wanted a copy of her wanted poster, just her.
And then show us the other one that you got.
Okay, this is the one. This is a legitimate, actual one of the original wanted posters of the Harrises and Patricia Hearst.
Wow, that's cool.
Again, this is one of the things. Before I left the FBI in '77, they were been authorized to get rid of some old files. So it became a kind of a free-for-all for getting things. They had like copies of Tokyo Rose's tape recordings.
Tokyo Rose.
She was this lady who was, during World War II, would send messages to the GIs and trying to convince them that they're going to lose the war.
So these were not Japanese propaganda.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it wasn't on tapes. It was actually on records. That's how they recorded. Well, we're going to throw it away. Well, everybody started lifting these things. And wanted posters. They had wanted posters of some of the gangsters from the 1930s. They went in a hurry, And so I was able to snag a few things. But, people were making collection. I don't know if that was proper or not, but a lot of these historical things were being salvaged from the FBI files. So anyway, after I was there for 4 years, I came back. My folks had moved back to Utah, and I moved back here so I could go to Weber State, graduate in 1980.
Weber State, great.
Wildcats, yes.
There's not many of us around.
That's that comment I made there for Boise during the Sunday devotional.
Paul Reeve. We love Paul Reeve, but don't be talking trash about Weber State.
That's right. That's what whatchamacallit had made the comment during his talk up there. Anyway, that's another topic. But I moved back to Colorado in 1981 and got on with the sheriff's department. Degrees in law enforcement in Jefferson County, Colorado, which is out of Golden, which is on the west side. Now, during the 9 years I worked for them, nothing too exciting, except the fact that Jefferson County, after I left 9 years later, 1999, gave us Columbine County. So that was my department I used to work for, and I knew a lot of the people involved.
Wow.
Again, I could get these newspaper clippings over there, and like I said, I told you earlier that one of the things I've been doing since I started doing this, whether I was in San Francisco or Denver or even Salt Lake, if I didn't buy the paper, I could go to the library and get out-of-state newspapers. I think almost every other week I would go to the libraries and spend the Denver library 3 or 4 hours just photocopying up clippings. And when you have that, and I fell in love with the New York Times. The New York Times is one paper that they have microfilm of all their papers from way back from the start in 1850 up to present.
Wow.
So I'd get the microfilm and go all the articles on. I had a project. I was going to photocopy everything they had on the Mormon Church. And I got halfway through it, and I've still got more to do. But it's amazing how as they go over the years, these articles that they would have on the Mormon Church from, like, say, 1850, where you'd see names like Grant or Sherman or Custer or all these people, and Brigham Young's getting just as much space in the paper as these guys are.
Wow.
You know, they even had reporters in the 1800s out here doing stories to the New York Times. Of course, the New York Times is the grand dam of all papers in America. And there was one year where they had, in one particular year, they had over 100 articles in one particular year on Mormonism.
Wow.
That's almost 2 a week.
What year was this
In
approximately?
the 1880s.
Oh, so polygamy was big.
Yeah.
And
when you consider the paper, what the big paper is, it may have been 8 or 10 sheets, but that's almost 2 a week.
Wow.
There would be other years where there was none. You know? And that's not even talking about articles about Ezra Taft Benson or George Romney or politicians. This strictly, so it kind of back my mind. It's one thing. I've got boxes someplace of all these photocopies of their microfilm, but so that. It's one of the things I love to do is going down and going to the library, you know. And of course, if you point over here, I will buy papers and do it. When I lived in Colorado, I had the major papers of Utah sent over to me. That was the Logan, Ogden, the Salt Lake papers, the Provo, and the St. George papers were sent to me. Wow. I had subscriptions. And BYU, you know, did the Universe, whatever. And then I came back here, and I kind of backed off on the other papers, but I still get the local papers here. Like,
so, are you one of the biggest collectors of Mormon media stuff?
Probably not as much as a church, you know? But I do, and because of that, and I've collected not just to kind of hide it home myself, but to share it. That's why last number of years I've shared, for example, you've interviewed Matt Harris from Colorado. Well, for the past year. I will pick up things because of his interest in the Black priesthood issue, clippings. Now he says some papers he can get on the internet, but others he doesn't. And I'm picking things out. Yeah. One of the things I've noticed is like on the church magazines, the Ensign and the Friend and whatever the teeny bopper
New
one
Era.
New Era. A lot of more photos of Black members of the church in them. And it's just like last couple of years, you like conference issue. About 20 pages had Black people in them. And I don't know if that's if the church magazine are trying to incorporate that to show that inclusiveness or what, but I just kind of know that. So I will buy.
So you've noticed a change in church magazines, whereas it was all white before, and now there's more color in it.
There's more diversity of minorities and things like that. And the same thing with the church news, and with this being the year of, with June 8th. And things like that. So I'm just sending this big package. When I went up to Boise to the Mormon History Association, Matt was there. And here you go, Matt. I had did interviews off, taped interviews off the radio. So again, I enjoy doing this because I'm collecting it to help people who might be writing. Me, I have poor writing skills, so I'll never write a book. But to share it with people. And I've done that with a number of other people who have presented. My friend Craig Foster has written, along with Neil Bringhurst, 3 series of Persistence of Polygamy. Volume 3 have my photos in them of some of these communities.
Yes, you're a photographer.
Yes.
Tell us about your photography.
I grew up in a home where my dad was a camera salesman, managed a camera store in San Francisco. Well, I was as a kid taking pictures. I had this little Instamatic when I went on my mission. If I took more than one roll picture a year, it was great. But I got here in Utah when I went to school and got myself a nice camera, 35 millimeter. So I started taking more, but 35 millimeter is expensive. A roll of film, $7-8 just to get it developed. Well, they came up with a digital camera, thank goodness. Now, one of my, which we haven't got to yet, where I work now in law enforcement is the Salt Lake City Police Department, their crime lab. And that's how I know George Throckmorton, but we'll get into that. One of my things I do at crime scenes is photography. So that just builds right into it. And with digital, you can take 1,000 pictures and not waste a dime on anything. You just have to download it on a computer and you're fine. Well, that a number of years ago, maybe 15 plus years ago, I started taking pictures at Sunstone Symposium. And they appreciated that. So next thing you know, I'm now their official photographer. I go to the symposium and I just document everything. I miss some of the sessions, but I just go around taking pictures. And they know it. I have fun with it because I catch people sometimes eating, their mouth open, or sleeping, or whatever. Then I got involved with doing it for the Mormon History Association, for the John Whitmer Historical Society, Utah State Historical Society. When they have their conference, they have me come and do it. You know, and they're very gracious about it because they'll put my name up here. He does this. Because I'm willing to go miss out some sessions or hearing the whole session by taking photos of people who's speaking, what's going on. And of course, you know, I go to things like Kirk Bench's book signings and take pictures. And Kirk is very good about it. Here's a disc of my photos. And like, again, back in June, we went up to there in Boise with the Mormon History Association. We had 1,500 images I took.
Oh, wow.
And I've got a backlist of people. Can you send me a disc? Can you send me a copy of my photo?
And I'll say one of the first, I don't remember, I think it was Mormon History Associations. I always like to sit, usually I try to either sit in the front or the back, wherever the closest plug is, because I always got to plug in my laptop. Yeah. But I was like, I remember they sent out a newsletter, and I was in the picture, and I was like, oh, nice.
And you got one of me too, a good one. So, but it's fun too because everybody knows me after 20 years of doing this as you're the photographer. Mm-hmm. I've got to know Elder Jensen, the church historian, and Elder Snow. They know I have a camera. I have people come up and say, "Where's your camera?" Well, here it is. You know, if I don't have my camera with me, they say, "Well, go get your camera. There's something wrong. You have to have your camera." And but it's fun and it's enjoyable, and I feel I'm involved in something. And again, it's something that's historical enough that eventually these things will go BYU. And I get with digital. We don't know how long the digitals are going to last. You know, we're finding out that negatives, if they're not preserved right, start to fade.
Right.
That's why, and the fun part is going to BYU because the film, the negatives, they're putting in a freezer basically.
Wow. And
you go, if you want to get it, you have to have a 2-day notice because they have to bring it out, let it thaw out to use it.
Wow.
We don't know what's going to happen with the disc and putting on a computer saves them, but on the disc itself, we don't know yet. When they'll disintegrate or not.
Right.
So,
put them on the internet, they'll last forever.
Yeah, exactly. But like I said, it's been one of the things. And besides some criminal historical events, I've had pictures on. It's the LDS stuff, and I'm proud to say that in 2008, at the Mormon History Association conference in Sacramento, I was given a special award for my contributions to Mormon history because of what you're seeing here, the collection and the photography and things like that, which I'm very humbled at because it was such a sweet thing to have happen. You know, so I got to sit up there with my little certificate. You know? So it excites me when I go to these things because of just the stuff. You know, I get away from what I do. For a living. You know, so
now you mentioned you were a crime scene photographer,
or a crime scene investigator, a crime lab tech. These are all titles I have.
So, especially here in Utah, can you talk about your participation in some of the more famous or infamous? I guess
not presently, as long as I'm employed. I will say, in the 25 years I've been with Salt Lake Police Department, I've been involved in the Elizabeth Smart kidnapping. Did some photography and work on that. Lori Hacking murder, the little girl that was kidnapped and killed, Destiny Norton. One of the things I've done for about 11 years was to document the activities of the protesters at the General Conference.
Okay, Kelly.
Okay. Yeah, just not in the street preachers and things like that.
Oh, the street preachers, okay.
Because of the lawsuits that these folks have had against the city and the police department, it became necessary for us to document their activities to show that as a city, as a police department, we're following federal guidelines to free speech and city ordinances. They were taking pictures of us, we take pictures of them. And for 11 years, I did it at every conference. So I don't know what went on inside Conference Center, but I was out there with all the various groups and things. It was important enough that when they had the federal lawsuit here, my photos went to the federal court, and they also went to the the appeals court in Denver, they used my photos in defending the city.
Which federal lawsuit? I'm not familiar with
The federal courts here in Salt Lake. On the lawsuit, the street preachers sued the city for violating their rights of free speech.
Oh.
Because we were...
What year was this?
Oh, this is 10 years ago.
10 years ago,
yeah.
Okay.
Some in the because I started in 95 and went to about 2006 or so. And then I stopped doing it because it became unnecessary. But they were saying that, see, we had free speech zones where these people could stand, as long as they weren't blocking people walking across the crosswalk or blocking away interest. And sometimes you might have a little, I call push and shoves, somebody didn't like what you were doing and push and shoves, and we had to control it.
Yeah, some of those can be not very nice people.
Sometimes they get, there was some fun stuff other times, because you got the street preachers and anybody who had something. Sometimes they'd have protest march. It was almost like there's conference and then there's a circus going on outside. And even Mormon people doing their thing. There was one lady came from Idaho and she had a sign that said, "If you're a Mormon, I'll give you a hug." And she was hugging everybody, and it's like, whoa, So that was interesting seeing that. And you usually had media coverage sometimes. Well, here they're out there protesting. Again, Craig Foster and I, a couple years ago at a fair conference, did a presentation. What Mormon History and at a fair conference about the history of protest around Temple Square. And just some of the stuff that, it's just crazy. The day comes when there's nobody out there, I'm going to worry. Because, they're going to be there. They always have. I saw that when I first attended a general conference in April of 1970, when I came back with my stake president, and they were passing stuff out. What's all this, And that's how I came across Gerald Sanders Tanner, because someone was passing out their newsletter. Utah Lighthouse, Modern Microfilm Company at that time. So that's why I found out about them and all these people pamphleteering out there, Now it's even got bigger because they'll have signs and whatever, and you'll have marches. It's part of the environment in Salt Lake and at other places, because they'll also do it at temple pageants, temple openings.
Manti, I've seen them there in Manti pageant.
Up at the Martin Harris thing. Every temple opening, they'll be there. Again, in Denver, we had, in the 80s, when we had the Denver temple opening, we had 3 weeks, and they were out there. And like I said, they had, there was always somebody every night for those 3 weeks lecturing about the church someplace in Denver. And they had the one Protestant church where they had their own, little visitor center where you go to the visiting, you go to the temple, and then you go over there and they can have their little thing too. So
a Protestant visitor center.
It was a Lutheran church, but it was a number of Protestant churches, evangelical churches that kind of joined up together to present stuff. The thing about history about churches says there's nothing new with this stuff. We've had it from day one. I can't jokingly say that when Joseph walked out of the grove, we've had it. We've had our critics, both secular and religious, and nothing's new. It's the same thing. And like I said, the day comes when they don't do it, I'm going to be worried. It's just part of the environment. You go with it. I know one of the things I try to tell people down there, because people would come and say, well, can we stop them doing it? No. They have a right to be out here on the sidewalk and do it. Just ignore them. Don't get involved with them. Don't get in a fight. Just ignore them. Sometimes they will go, what I think is overboard, with their insults. They used to stand out before they were removed from the Main Street Plaza and stand out there near the gate of the east side of the temple and yell and call the brides sluts, whores, and prostitutes. One day of your life, your family's filming it or taking pictures, these guys are yelling this stuff.
Yeah.
And they would taunt. Sometimes they'd wear temple outfits. That's another thing. You wear a temple outfit outside, wave the apron at people, wave the garments at them. And they had one case way back in 94, before I started doing it, where this gentleman, member of the church from Probury, came up and got waved. He grabbed the garment out of the guy's hands. Well, the guy said, well, he assaulted me. He touched me, This poor guy had to go to court, and they basically said, well, you really didn't attack him, but he did. So he was given a year's probation, and they said, if you keep your nose clean, we'll wipe it off the books. But it's this taunting that you see sometimes, and sometimes the best thing is just ignore it. And,
which is very hard to do sometimes.
Sometimes
they can be very offensive. I've heard some.
And of course, like you say, you gotta be careful because they're filming. I've seen on some Facebook pages, my picture shows up, and oh, there's the guy taking their picture, me taking a picture of them, taking a picture of me. So, but then, like I said, I worked on. In the interest.
So let me back up. Okay. So there's nothing, you can't really talk too much about the Elizabeth Smart case or Mark hacking. Or,
nothing. I was involved. Mm-hmm. I've been to the Smart House on a couple of occasions on that in a number of places. My job is just take pictures or process for fingerprints and things like that. That was a part of what I would do. Same thing with the other cases. I was just involved in them to some degree with what I do. The photography or collecting evidence or so forth. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I missed out on Trolley Square, but I did do,
that was horrible.
All those things. But that one. And,
so for people, some people might not know what you're referring to with Trolley Square. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It was 2007. A gentleman walked into Trolley Square in Salt Lake.
Which is a mall.
A mall, on the east side there. And opened fire and killed 5 or 6 people before he was killed by police officers off-duty police officers on scene. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those just random mass shooting type of things. And that comes right after Elizabeth Smart. And so it got a lot of national publicity.
Valentine's Day or the day before.
Something like that. Because I was on the phone talking to a long distance to a girlfriend. And I'm watching TV, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, because they were right there live. And it said, that's Trolley Square. What's going on?
Yeah.
And so, but I never got involved with that one.
Yeah, I was actually in graduate school at the time, and I remember somebody said, don't go down by Trolley Square. There's cops everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I remember I did kind of drive by, and I had no idea what was going on at the time. And then,
that takes a lot of work because of the scene itself. And diagramming and pictures and collecting, and it's just, one of those tragedy things that in our time we're having.
And it was so senseless. Like,
yes.
It just made no sense at all.
Yeah. So it's it's one of the sad things of my business. I kind of sadly joke, but I've always got job security.
Yeah, unfortunately.
But then I'm looking forward here the next year to retire, maybe.
Okay.
So I can go back to doing the fun stuff. Like I said, what I do with this stuff, I enjoy. I have such a high going to these conferences and being involved in this stuff that it just takes my mind off the bad stuff. But yet at the same time, my interest in history, I'm involved in some historical things.
Well, let's talk. I know earlier we were talking a little bit about Mormons in the FBI.
Yes.
And so that is something you can give us some more details on.
Yes.
So,
again, working with the FBI for 4 years, there was a very noticeable thing about the Mormons. And there's been an underlying fable about Mormons in the FBI, some good, some bad. When I started working in San Francisco, we had what they call the 10-day interview, where you're interviewed by one of the big bosses. This gentleman was not LDS, but he was the assistant special in charge, which means he's one of the big bosses. It was interesting because he was one of the agents who worked on the Mississippi murders back in the early 60s of the 3 civil rights workers. Yeah, not Emmett Till. It was these 3 college students who came down and were killed and buried out in the film. Mississippi Burning movie is kind of about that. But he was involved because up on his wall he had a picture of him overlooking these bodies they're pulling them out of the ground. Kind of gross, But he asked me, he says, well, I see you served a Mormon mission. And he talked about Mormon agents he knew. My interview was 20 minutes. 5 minutes was about my work and what I thought of the FBI. The other 15 was about Mormonism and my mission and things like that. So that started off. Well, I got to know a lot of the Mormon agents there. In fact, 2 of the agents were in my LDS ward in Walnut Creek, California. But I was told, when they would identify, he's a member of the tribe. What do you mean a member of the tribe? Well, he's LDS, but that's how we identify ourselves.
Oh, really?
He's a member of the tribe. In L.A., they were called the LDS Mafia in the L.A. office, and we'll get into that story. But that's how we knew it. Well, one thing I noticed, I just come off my mission, so antagonism, you saw it. We had where the agents sat, what they called the bullpen, and they had a little storage room where they put their files and things. But they had a bulletin board. And every once in a while, there'd be an article about the LDS Church. Be pinned up the board, underlined and marked and everything. It would come down and go back up, come down. And there would be snide comments about Mormons, as you go around, not realizing I'm LDS. I hear these things, but it was kind of, be forewarned, there's some antagonism. We had a couple of agents in San Francisco that were evangelical Christians, so I had this one run around with this one guy. He kept trying to give me stuff, and I've already got that pamphlet. I don't need to see another one. But then, of course, we had the Patty Hearst case. One of the special agent in charge of the squad that handled bank robberies and kidnappings was LDS. His name was Brian Wheeler. Did I already set this? Or?
No, go ahead.
His name was Brian Wheeler. At the time of the kidnapping, he was a council in the bishopric of the San Francisco.
The time of the Patty Hearst kidnapping.
It was 1974.
Okay.
A number of the Mormon agents were involved in investigations, various aspects, but the big one was one of the agents that was credited with the arrest of Patty Hearst. The agent named Jason Moulton, a Utah native, came from Heber Valley, went to BYU, LDS. And in fact, in the CNN documentary back in February, he was the agent they interviewed. So he, an expert on the thing, I would think, He retired about 15 years ago as the assistant special agent in charge of the Seattle office. And he and his wife served a mission in Kentucky about 5 years ago. And I've had some minor contacts with him since then. But one of the things that happened during the Hearst case, when I was assigned to the Berkeley resident agency, they brought a number of agents in from other agencies for extra manpower. Came from Sacramento, San Diego, and L.A. One of the agents they brought up from L.A. was a guy named Richard W. Miller. Very interesting character, because 10 years later, he was first FBI agent arrested for espionage as a Russian spy.
Like a Mormon Russian spy.
Ex-Mormon, because he'd been excommunicated prior to this for an extramarital affair, but that didn't stop people from going after him. Well, I found out very quickly he was LDS, because people would ask him, well, we have an agent up in the Eureka office as part of the San Francisco division who was LDS, who was the state president at the same time up there in Eureka. Are you related to him? He says, no, I know who he is. He says, it's first Richard Miller.
There's two Richard Millers.
Yeah, we got Richard W., which is the agent
spy
we're talking about, and Richard G. Miller.
Who's the stake president?
Yeah.
Who's the good guy?
Yeah. Interesting. There's a connection. I get another connection. He says, I know who he is. He's Mormon. I'm a Mormon too, but I'm not related to him. Well, some of the backbiting and backtalk about him was that they would describe this Richard W. Miller, the future spy, as that fat, dumb, lazy, stupid Mormon agent. And, not realizing, hey, I'm LDS too here, but you just kind of ignore it. Well, after about 3 or 4 weeks, they all went back to L.A. And I'm sitting at my desk next to the office of the senior resident agent, the boss of the Berkeley office, named Don Jones, was not LDS. He was a Presbyterian elder. And he knew I was LDS, but I'm sitting there listening, and he's talking to this other agent about how unprofessional these agents were about this other agent, talking bad about him and attacking his religion. He says, I'm going to write a letter to the SAC down in L.A., the boss down there, and saying how bad this was. And then he kind of saw me kind of eavesdropping, turned to me and says, does that meet with your approval? Oh, yeah, sure. So, but there's always that underlying Mormon thing there, And again, like I said, it wasn't like every day and you got along fine, but there were just once in a while you'd get these snide comments. I had one agent who I got along with fine until he found out I was Mormon. And after that, he gave me the cold shoulder.
Oh.
So, anyway, Richard Miller, 10 years later, ends up being busted. He lasted almost 20 years in the Bureau, but he was just sloppy. As some people say, he should never have been hired. He went to BYU, served a mission, could speak Spanish, but he was overweight all the time. He lost car keys. He was trying to sell things, Amway out of his car, and just always in trouble.
Oh, really?
So I guess he was trying to resurrect his career as best, so he started communicating unofficially with this female Russian spy, had an affair with her. They arrested him, went through 3 trials. But what added on to that problem is that the special agent in charge of the FBI office in L.A. at that time was a guy named Richard Britsley, LDS. He'd been a bishop, was in the stake presidency. And he had butted heads with, after he came in there, one of the assistant special agents in charge of the LA was a guy named Bernardo Matt Perez. Matt Perez had been special agent in charge of the San Juan office, but got busted back and sent to LA. So he got demoted, went there. Well, he and Richard Britzing butted heads all the time. Well, Matt Perez felt we should fire Richard Miller. He's incompetent. Well, Britzing said, we're not going to do that. I'm trying to help him. And then comes the spy thing, which kind of turned to black.
So let me make sure. So Britzing was LDS.
Yes, he is LDS.
Was Matt Perez, is that what you said his name
Yeah.
was? He was not LDS.
No.
And so Matt's saying you need to fire this
Mormon guy,
agent
yeah.
that everybody viewed as incompetent.
Yeah. And Richard Britzing said, well, I don't think he can make a recommendation. I think the final decision comes out of Washington, D.C., whether they do it. And I sense a lot of agents weren't up to par, but the Bureau was very reluctant, I think, to fire people because you spend all that money and time recruiting them and training them, and you kind of hope that they will quit on their own. I saw them do that with not only agents but with clerks, because I was supervisor of some clerks, and chief clerk wanted to get rid of people, but let's just give them a stupid job and maybe they'll quit, which would happen. People, I'm sitting in this corner and I'm just going to leave because I'm not doing anything. But again, that's just my perspective of how they would do things. Well, later on, they had 3 trials on Richard Miller. He eventually went to prison. Richard Britzing retired, moved to Utah, became head of LDS Church Security for a number of years, was a mission president in Washington, D.C., and now he's just enjoying his retirement. Matt Perez was part of the lead plaintiff in a lawsuit by Latino FBI agents against the FBI for discrimination. And they had 2, racial discrimination and religious discrimination. And in this lawsuit, he kept bringing up the Mormon issue all the time. And when it finally was settled in the federal court in El Paso, Judge Button, I believe that was his name, ruled that, yes, there was racial discrimination against these agents for promotions and whatever. But the religious aspect, I think there's points there, but he kind of backed off. He didn't rule on that issue. This is a big time.
So let me make sure I'm understanding on that. So Matt Perez was complaining about religious discrimination, that the Mormons were protecting Mormons? Is that what he was saying?
Well, among the things, Mormons are getting promoted over Latinos.
So Mormons were being favored in that case.
Yeah, favored. And because of Britzing being kind to Richard Miller by not firing him, or things like that. And it just and of course we bring in all these other agents from other offices who are Latino, and the religious issue came up. In fact, one of the co-plaintiffs in this case was also Latino agent, was also LDS. So we did have that, but I have a book that he wrote, or somebody wrote for him with his name on it, where he talks about this all the time. It's not only the discrimination on the race issue, but Mormon stuff comes up all the time. So there was apparently some major concern there. And this comes right after black agents had sued the Bureau. So Hoover's FBI...
For racial discrimination.
Yes. So Hoover's FBI was very white, and it took a long time before it wasn't on until the early 70s they hired a female agent. And same thing with this. Well, things have overly changed since then, but in the 80s they had to go through these lawsuits to change things. Matt Perez later was promoted to assistant, or the special agent in charge of Albuquerque, went back and was a supervisor back in D.C. at the FBI office back there. So I guess he got what he got. But, just the fact that there was this Mormon connection involved in this.
Now, is it true that the FBI likes to recruit Mormons?
I think that's more myth than truth. It stands out because hopefully a young man or young woman who goes to work for the FBI has the background. Well, technically, we're supposed to have these morals and characteristics. We don't party, we don't smoke, we don't drink. A lot of them served missions, so they had language skills. And so that was attractive. Now, some of this may go back to a Mormon FBI agent who was killed in the line of duty. Back in the 1930s, we had the gangsters, the Don Dillinger.
Before we do that, I just want to finish up with one more thing. Yeah. With back to Richard Miller. Yeah. So what was he convicted of? What
spy, passing on information.
What was the information that he passed on?
Just internal material on what the spies, what the Russian spies were doing, and passing on information that he acquired as an agent and passing on to this female.
So passing information about Russian agents in the U.S. and so then
and other stuff that she could use to pass on to her superiors.
Okay, so did he get any agents killed or anything like that? No. He wasn't passing on FBI information. It was more of
I think it may have been FBI information that he had as an agent. Passing on, trying to get stuff from her, so he had to kind of tempt her with stuff too.
Was this financial? Was he getting paid?
I can't remember if it was financial or not. It was unauthorized, and that's where he got in trouble.
Okay.
But he was trying to save his career because they have pictures of him meeting with this girl under surveillance. He was been under surveillance by the FBI, so they have pictures of him.
Oh, wow.
And he was doing it unauthorized, and that's what probably got him convicted.
Okay.
So, he after he served his time, he moved here to Utah, and I heard a rumor a couple years ago that he'd passed away, but I haven't been able to verify that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he could still be in jail right now.
No, he's out. He's out of prison.
He's out of prison.
Long time ago.
Okay.
But whether he's still alive or not, I don't know.
Okay.
So
go back. So you're saying something?
Oh, and during the time of the John Dillinger and the Babyface Nelson and all these criminals, a number of agents were brought in to do special things. Of course, the most famous was Melvin Purvis. He was the lead guy out of Chicago, checking these people. Well, he had a team of other agents, inspectors with him, including one named Samuel P. Calley. Now, the name sounds familiar. That's because he was a son of Apostle Matthias Calley and half-brother to Matthew Calley. Samuel Calley served a mission in Hawaii for 4 years, got a law degree in D.C., and became an agent. He was only going to be there a short time, wanted to be a lawyer, but he got involved. Well, he was one of the teams, members of this team. Well, he was involved in the Dillinger case, the Mal Barker and the Barker family thing, but he was killed in the line of duty by Babyface Nelson. Babyface Nelson has 3 notches in his belt from 3 agents that he killed during his time before he was killed. Sam McCalley's buried here in the Salt Lake area, and so he was the first. Hoover took a liking to him because he was a hard worker, just came and did his job, and Hoover did not like Melvin Purvis because Purvis got a lot of publicity that Hoover didn't get. And eventually, Purvis left, and in I think 1960, the same gun he used to kill Babyface Nelson, or no, the gun he used to kill John Dillinger, he used on himself, committed suicide.
Oh.
One of those sad things. Well, we've had 3 Mormon agents, FBI agents, killed in the line of duty. Sam Calley was the first, and there was another agent.
And he was killed. So Sammy Calley was killed by Babyface Nelson.
Right.
Okay.
Another agent on this team of agents was a guy named Jay Newman, who was also LDS. Jay Newman served as special agent in charge of a number of offices. When he was in San Francisco in the 30s or 40s, he was a bishop in the San Francisco area. When he retired, he became the first director of public safety for the state of Utah. And he's been dead now for 20 years now, but he was part of this team. In fact, he was shot. The bullet went through his head, bounced off his head. So he had a scar up there, and he has a picture of his hat with a hole in it.
Wow.
But he's great. He was a great diarist, though. You go on the internet, look under J. Newman FBI, pages and pages. This guy wrote big stuff talking about his career and everything, and it's classic, historically, that you have somebody who's writing all this stuff about it. So there was another Mormon agent involved with these team of agents. The second Mormon agent killed in the line of duty was 1968 in San Antonio. A young man from Paris, Idaho, named Douglas Price. Went to Utah State, served a mission, got in with the FBI, and this was his first field office. They were down searching for a wanted fugitive. He was sent back to a car to pick up more ammunition and weapons. Well, he got confronted by the guy they looked for, who shot and killed him. And this wanted fugitive then turned the gun on himself. Douglas Price is buried up in Paris, Idaho, the Mormon community up there. What was interesting is that his body was escorted back to Paris from San Antonio by another Mormon agent named Robert Porter. What's significant about that is I knew Bob Porter in the San Francisco office. He had been a bishop down in San Ramon, and after I left, he was transferred down to the San Diego office and in 1979 was in the resident agency of El Centro, which is east of San Diego, where he and the other agent that was in the office were to meet with a gentleman who had some complaints about the Bureau. This guy walked in, opened fired on these two agents, and he killed them, but they also killed him. Well, Robert Porter was one of those agents killed there in El Centro. And it's so interesting that he was the one involved in taking Price's body back. And a great man. I really appreciated him. He was a hard worker. I got to know his son, a guy named Ken Porter. Ken followed his father's footsteps, became an FBI agent, served 30 years, retired about 5 years ago. He was assistant special agent in charge here in the Salt Lake office. He and I did a session at Sunstone in 2011 on Mormons and the FBI, so all this idea came from. He is now the director of church security for North America.
Oh, wow.
So they moved him up. 4 other Mormon agents have died while on duty, but due to accidents. We had an agent, Hart, in 1960, died in an auto accident in Idaho. We had Mark Kirkland in an airplane crash. Hereford, another airplane crash. Then a Gregory Knapp was the last one about 5-6 years ago. Was in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and he'd been on the beach and saved somebody from drowning, but drowned himself. So these are Mormon agents, and we've had a number of agents over the years. Once in a while, you read in the church news about somebody in a state presidency, FBI agent, you know. There's been one Mormon, I forgot his name, I think Christensen, was an assistant director of one of the divisions for a while. So anyway, it's there. Again, going back to your question of, is there favoritism? I don't know. I don't think, some people say there's a large percentage of Mormons in the FBI than any other religion or something like that, or there's a higher percentage compared to the population. I don't know. No one's ever done a study yet, so I think it's more myth, or people just supposing that it really is. So, but it attracts people. And again, depending on whether you like or hate the FBI, whether you make a big thing about it. So.
Well, interesting. Well, I see you've got another, I think you said this was an old newspaper article.
Yeah. It's Frank Leslie Illustrated Newspaper. I have to say that I have a friend down in Rocky Ridge, which is down near Nephi. I don't know, Malcolm Beckery is his name. He's a member of the AUB Church, which is a polygamous church. They're the ones at the point of the mountain. That's where their headquarters is. But he's down in Rocky Ridge. But
AUB, that's Cody Brown's group.
Yes,
Sister Wives.
Cody Brown's. And, well, we've gone down. Very nice guy, very friendly guy, but open. You know, like I said, and Craig Foster introduced me to them because Craig's done a lot of work. But you go into their home. He's only got 2 wives.
Only.
But very warm, very welcoming. Well, he collects books and things. So one day we're down there having dinner one Sunday, and he just says, "I got something." He goes in and he pulls these out. These are not photocopies. These are actual newspapers from 1877.
Wow.
And it's about John D. Lee and Mount Meadows. And he says,
and that's John D. Lee in the coffin, right?
Picture. Yeah, that's him in the coffin and the picture up here, the drawing. And it was like, he just gives me, he says, "Well, what do I owe you for?" "Oh, nothing." And I said, "Well, who do you want me to hurt? You know, you want to beat up?" I said, "No." It's just very gracious. Because that is his business. One of the things he does makes money is selling these things, like many of our friends who are book dealers. And so it's like, wow, that is just a generosity that, you know, you don't overlook.
Cool. So it's an actual newspaper. So tell us who John D. Lee was.
John D. Lee was a young man from back east. He was I don't know, I think he joined the church as a young man. He was an adopted son of Brigham Young. Came out.
Now, the interesting thing about that is he was actually older than Brigham Young. Did you know that?
I think you're right, yes.
Yes. So.
But he had that tight connection with Brigham Young. Right. Well, he goes down to southern Utah, northern Arizona, and settles down there. There's a place not far from Page, Arizona, on the Utah side called Lee's Ferry. He only lived there a couple of years, but it was where they could go across the Colorado River.
So let's jump a little bit back in time, because as I recall, so John D. Lee lived in Nauvoo, was there when the prophet was killed, was sealed to to Brigham back when they had what they called the law of adoption. I know my namesake, Dr. Richard Bennett, no relation, kind of like, yeah. So kind of like the Millers there, no relation there. But so he talked a little bit about the law of adoption. So at any rate, so John D. Lee was sealed to Brigham as a son. Right. Everybody came west. Brigham became governor. Mm-hmm. And so what was it? It was 1857, I believe.
It was Mountain Meadows.
The Mountain Meadows Massacre. So what was John D. Lee's role in the...
Well, he was on the subordinates to it, because he had other church leaders, Higby, I've forgotten the names, but a number of other people.
William
Dame, Higby.
There's a Klingon Smith, I know.
Yeah, Klingon Smith, who were really in charge. He was just one of the military leaders, but...
In the Nauvoo Legion.
Yes.
So the Nauvoo Legion here in Utah.
And they were the ones that committed the atrocity of killing these people from Arkansas.
Now, what were the Mormons upset? Because the Fancher Party, as I understand, they came down through northern Utah and then going through southern Utah on their way to California.
Yeah.
What precipitated that?
A lot of rumors. Again, you're talking about a topic we could talk for the next 20 years about.
We could. Yeah.
Because people would go through, but something about this group. Now, according to the Mormons, and they're the ones that survived, that these people were making threats at them, poisoning the water, poisoning the animals, saying we're going to go join the army and come back. Because there was the army coming out to Utah.
So there were rumblings because of, there was supposedly a Mormon rebellion.
Yes.
And so was it Buchanan that was
Buchanan
president?
sent the army, Johnson's army.
But he hadn't sent it yet.
Yeah, but there were rumors.
There were rumors that they
Then you also had Parley Pratt being murdered. So you have this stuff. For some reason, the Mormons got, and Robert Briggs, out of a lawyer in Southern California, called it the fog of war. Something Robert McNamara talked about the Vietnam War, why the atrocities happened. The fog of war blinded people. And for one thing, they went after these folks for a 3-day siege down there in the Mountain Meadows, killed all the adults and saved, except for some children they saved. Then they kind of hid the story about it.
Yeah. So, because as I recall, let's talk a little bit more about the massacre. So, and especially Lee's involvement in that. Yeah. So basically, what happened, as I understand it, I'm still trying to get Rick Turley to get on here.
Yes.
But we're having a little trouble there. But at any rate, so the Fancher Party's coming down. They're kind of like these street preachers. They're just being really taunting, according to the Mormons.
Yeah. Plus the fact, with the onset of the army, they weren't getting supplies from the Mormons. We're not going to help you because we've got to support ourselves.
Because Brigham had said, we need all the supplies. We're not going to sell any to immigrants.
So right off the bat, again, there's that butting of the head.
And the immigrants needed it in order to get to California.
Yeah.
And so, so there was some issues there going on. And as I recall, so Brigham had told everybody, don't sell to any immigrants, period. And so the Fancher Party, in the worst timing possible, comes during this very tense time.
Right.
Tries to buy some supplies. The Mormons won't sell supplies. And so they were pretty ticked off about that.
And for whatever reason, they got their amount of metals. They were surrounded.
And now Lee was an Indian agent, right?
Yes.
Wasn't he the Indian agent? So he was kind of in charge of talking to the Indians. That was actually a government position. Is that right? So, and I guess this is where it gets really confusing because it's kind of a he said sort of a thing.
Yeah.
Where you got the Fanchers aren't here to speak for themselves,
right?
But at any rate, so it seems like Lee had talked to the Indians and said, "Hey, if you want to attack this Fancher party, you're welcome to it. Yeah. Take all their stuff because we're ticked off about them."
Yeah.
So the Indians, as I understand it, tried to attack the Fancher party. The Fancher party circled their wagons and basically fought off the attack. And so now. So what happened next?
Well, again, I could talk for years on it. And I see this bookcase over here is all Mountain Meadows and related. They went there with the idea we're going to help these people, but turned on them. Again, what was going through their minds, I don't know, of why they would do that. The whole argument that seems to be is how much were the church leaders in Salt Lake involved with ordering this? Was this a thing that these saints in that area did on their own? Now we know that after they had these people surrounded, a writer was sent to Salt Lake and Brigham what she would do. He sends Haslam back and says, leave them alone. By that time, it was all done.
Yeah, because there was no telegraph back in the day. In fact, the telegraph, Brigham Young put in the telegraph so that they wouldn't have these communication problems. But yeah, so a writer goes from basically, was it Cedar City or St. George?
Cedar City.
City Cedars. And he goes to ask Brigham what to do. He comes back, and the settlers are already dead.
Yeah.
Okay. So as I understand it, from what I understand with the Mountain Meadows Massacre, so, there's a lot of tensions going on. The Indians, so John D. Lee kind of spurs the Indians to attack, says it's going to be an easy target, but it's not an easy target. And so they surround themselves. So John D. Lee and William Dame and Klingon Smith and Higbee, they're kind of the leaders of this whole thing.
Right.
So they come out and they say, well, if you'll turn over your weapons, we'll save you from the Indians.
Yeah.
So as I understand it, every Mormon man had a gun.
Yeah.
Was walking the men from the Fancher party out, and then the women and children were kind of in the back. And somebody gave a signal. Was it Lee that gave the signal?
I can't remember.
Something to the effect of "do your duty," and then every Mormon man turned to the Fancher and shot and killed them. And then they left the women and children to be attacked by the Indians.
Yeah. Again, you got so many different stories, and as the fact is, I think they realized, because when they reported back to Brigham in Salt Lake, what happened is not what they actually did. They kind of lied to Brigham.
Because Lee was one of the people that went to Brigham and told him what happened, but he lied about it.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things is that supposedly the church or the church leaders tried to hide this, but I saw an article in the New York Times 2 months later, before the end of the year, we're talking about this massacre of white people down in southern Utah. I mean, it's not like we have instant news today, but it was very quick when it started going around. And when the government comes and then they look into it, and again, the Johnson's army there and all the government investigation, here comes Mountain Meadows in the middle of it. Now, of course, you have Brigham kind of telling John D. Lee to take off and hide, and because they're trying to find the. And of course, it was 20 years later when they.
Okay, so let's make sure we've got those details there. So Lee participates in the massacre. Of course, he wasn't the only person that participated in the massacre.
He was a major player, but he was not the lead in this whole.
He was not the lead. And I guess there's a dispute as to whether he was the one that issued the order. Do your duty is the order supposedly, or not. So there's a lot of dispute as to who actually said that, and a lot of.
Like I said, we could talk the next 20 years about it. Like I said, and we have various parties, because the whole issue really is not that there was an atrocity, but what did Salt Lake know about it?
Right.
And did they order it?
And that's the new book coming out with Richard Turley and Barbara Jones Brown.
Right.
So
and of course we have our friend Will Bagley, who's promoting one view of it.
Yeah.
Who go to his grave promoting that idea. Others, how do you protect? And the fact is that there were so many things my old professor at Weaver Staging Session says, well, the church leaders didn't order it, but they did a good job of trying to cover it up when they found out what was going on. But in fact, you got the army coming down. And then I go back to what Briggs said, the fog of war. When you have all this stuff going on, you don't know what's going on. When you see what happens with Johnson's army, well, they were ready to burn down Salt Lake and head to the mountains, and we did it before, we'll move again, and that's when they went down to Camp Floyd and settled outside of Salt Lake, so they wouldn't have those problems. There was a very high war, fighting attitude going on, or fear there, and right in the middle of it, here you have Mountain Meadows, which does not go over well. Those Mormons out there are just killing people left and right. And we had other instances of individuals being killed, from the Gunnison thing to the parishes. All this stuff is that there's this Western, activity going on of killing people, and that was
there's a lot of vigilante justice out here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, again, that's not my expertise, other than the one.
Okay. Well, let's just tell this for a second, and then we'll get to where your expertise is. But okay, so at any rate, the story goes, at least as I understand it, Lee, after the massacre, goes up to Brigham Young, lies about it, lies about the whole thing, blames it all on the Indians. So we had nothing to do with it.
And in his diary, he says, because people were saying in the newspapers from back east that Brigham knew, he says Brigham knew nothing about it till I told him. That's in his diaries, you know.
Oh, really?
So he knew nothing about it till I told him. And
so he was sent up to tell, hey, all these people died, but we had nothing to do with it.
Yeah,
it was all the Indians. Blames the Indians for the whole thing.
Yeah.
So at any rate, so Brigham, at least as we understand it, the best we can. Now, Will Bagley disagrees.
Yeah.
Thinks that Brigham was on the whole thing. So he lies about it, and so Brigham is a little bit worried and tries to protect John D. Lee and sends him to Arizona. I think you were talking about Lee's Ferry, right? To kind of hide him, basically.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about Lee's Ferry then?
Okay. Well, Lee's Ferry is a little outpost near the Colorado River. It takes a couple miles to drive in off the major highway. It's an old rock fort. Lee was only there a couple years. North of that is a little farming area called Lonely Dell, which is a very nice little thing, but it's really obscure. Lee wasn't there that long, but it got his name because this was where they would come across the river, the Colorado River, because it winds down through that section of town, or of the state. But he wasn't there that long. Again, it was just one of the many places. He lived up in Parowan. I think John D. Lee's buried in Parowan. And so he would transfer out until it finally got to a point where somebody had to be tried. And he became the one. Not that he was innocent, but because the others kind of got off on it, and he was the one that was found guilty.
So when was the trial?
Oh,
do you know?
In 1875, 76.
Okay, so the massacre occurs in 1857.
20 years later.
It's about 20 years later that the trial actually happens. Mm-hmm. And Brigham,
they had one, he was acquitted, then they did another one where he was found guilty.
Yeah, so from what I understand, because I've got some of those, if you want to pull out those Mountain Meadows Massacre books, those are, believe it or not, I've actually read those. And the interesting, well, go ahead and show those to the camera.
This is the
collected legal papers. And so that's volume 1, and then we've got volume 2, which is the trial.
Same thing.
So these are raw documents. Now, I know, because I went to the book signing. In fact, I think I saw you at that one. And because Richard Turley, Janice Johnson, and Legene Carruth. So Legene is fantastic because she transcribed a lot of these court records. I know one of the things that Richard Turley said was, everybody thinks they know about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, but nobody had ever actually transcribed the record. And one of the things that he was finding was you needed to get like original source documents, and a lot of these were in shorthand. And so Legene is the one who put those together. I actually talked to Legene, and I asked her if she would be interviewed, and she said no, because she said she was almost getting post-traumatic stress disorder because the trial notes were so graphic, and this was such a horrible atrocity, and so she just didn't feel comfortable talking about that. But it really was a tremendous tragedy. But Richard and Janice, I know, we're just saying we've got to get, before we can really tell the story, we have to have like original source documents, and so that's what those 2 volumes are. Yeah. So they're original. They're not. There's no narrative in them. And so I've read through them, but I'm waiting for the next book.
The one that's been taking all these years.
And so, because, do you have his other book, Richard's other book?
Massacre.
Massacre at Mountain Meadows.
Yeah. This is the first one.
That's the first one. And so that ends basically at the massacre. Yeah. And that's a fantastic book, too. Let's see, Ron
Walker, Glenn Leonard, and Richard Turley.
So they put that one together, and so they basically stopped at the massacre, and so the next book is supposed to be about the cover up. Yeah. And how much did Brigham know, and when did he know it?
And again, it's one of those things. I have a list of the 10 biggest controversies in Mormon history. The first one is, of course, polygamy, which outdoes everybody else.
Right.
But as you go down the list, Mount Meadows is one of the controversies, because even after 150 some odd years, it's still a major topic. People always bring it up.
Yeah.
Mark Hofmann's on the top 10 list.
Well, and Hofmann has some stuff to do with that.
We'll get into that.
In a minute,
but it's just the fact that it's interesting how you're talking about the Western U.S. in the 1800s. One of the classic ones I have is we know about Billy the Kid and all these cowboys, Jesse James and all that. And yet the one person who's probably killed more than all of them combined was Porter Rockwell. At least that's what the claim is. Porter Rockwell killed more people than Billy the Kid, Jesse James, and all these other outlaws back at the time. And how much, in fact, he was claimed to have killed somebody 2 years after he actually died. Is one of the myths on him, and I've seen, and it's just, there's a line, and George told me to give this line, okay? So I'm going to do it now.
George
Throckmorton. When we've given lectures and discussions, we quote one movie, a line from one movie. And if anybody, whatever you hear what I say today, this is it. There was a movie that came out in the, I think 1950s, early 1960s, called The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, Lee Marvin. And it's a story about Jimmy Stewart, who comes back to this old town in some western state to bury his friend John Wayne, who had died. Well, his notoriety came because when he showed up in this town, he was a lawyer, and he's credited with killing the outlaw Liberty Valance, played by Lee Marvin. And beautifully done. He's evil. He's given credit with killing this guy because he was a bad guy. Eventually, he goes on to be the governor of this new state, the senator, an ambassador, and as the editor of the paper says, with a snap of your fingers, you could be the next vice president of the United States. So when he and his wife show up, the wife had to be the old girlfriend of John Wayne in the movie, shows up for the funeral, the editor of the paper says, well, we want to find out the true story. What's going on here? Because you're a senator. Boy, this is big news. Well, he tells them the story, but what he tells them at the end is that when they rehearsed the scene where he shoots Liberty Valance, he didn't shoot Liberty Valance. It was John Wayne in an alleyway who shoots and kills Liberty Valance. But yet, Jimmy Stewart gets the credit, becomes this famous person, and John Wayne's just this little farmer. So that's who this guy is, this guy we came to bury, this friend. Well, here's a reporter writing all this stuff down. So when he gets done with the story telling, I'm not the guy that did it, the editor takes the notes, tears them up, throws the notes in the fire. Jimmy Stewart, you're not going to use that story, Mr. Editor? He says, no. And here's the line. This is the West, sir. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. That is very productive in Mormon history, and history altogether, where the legend is more important than the actual facts. And I've seen that with a lot of things of history. And we get into Hoffman, a lot of that. But that's just a great line. And I always remember that when I hear stories, whether it's Mormon history or American history, I mean, George Washington didn't stand up in the boat going across the Delaware? Of course not. No, did he cut down the church? We don't know. But sometimes history is built that way. The novels, the Western novels of the 1800s, are not that way. I read of stories about Wyatt Earp, never shot, never injured or anything, Great career as a lawman, but half the stuff wasn't true. But I think that's the problem we have. We don't try to find the truth. We have today in politics, fake news, Did they really say that, really mean it? And that's the sad aspect of our society and our culture and our humanity, because we want to believe things that aren't true. And I'm sure a lot of people say, "Well, you believe in the Book of Mormon? You believe?" Oh, well, now we're going, going crazy on it. But it's just one of those things that happens with history. So,
all right. Well, I wanted to lay that foundation on John D. Lee because one of the things you are an expert on is something that to be honest, I had never heard of it until you had mentioned it to me, which was the Dead Lee Scroll. Okay. So tell us about the Dead Lee Scroll.
First of all, I want to do a disclaimer here. I don't consider myself an expert, Hoffman expert. It's been applied to me. I kind of tagged my wagon on to George Throckmorton, who you interviewed. He's been kind enough to include me in stuff. I've assisted him in some things. Well, one of the documents or artifacts that came up in 2002 was a lead plate they found down in Lee's Ferry, and it's been given the nickname of Deadly Scroll. Will Bagley gave it that name.
Okay.
It's a piece of lead, very thin, so it's not hard, it's a thing, that has an inscription written by John D. Lee, showing that suggesting Brigham Young George A. Smith was an apostle back at that time.
Who St. George is actually named after.
Yes. A cousin of Joseph Smith, did authorize the Mount Meadows. Well, right during the Olympics, they find this artifact in Lee's Ferry. Now, this fort was run down. It was locked up. You couldn't just walk in and do it. And it was dirty and filthy. So this gentleman named Alan Malmquist, who was a school teacher in that area at the time, but also on his off time was a park ranger for the National Park Service. He was the interpreter, which is the historian down there. He had a 3-year contract. Well, 2 years he'd get paid, 1 year he wouldn't. But he could do voluntary things like at Lee's Ferry or Lonely Dale, cleaning the place up and be covered by workman's comp. Well, he's in there cleaning up because they had dirt up to here and bat droppings and rat droppings. So he's in there cleaning. And all of a sudden he comes across this thing rolled up. He opens up and starts reading. John D. Lee, whoa, that has something to do with it. So he cleans it off and they look at it and they come up, hey, is this a confession? Is this some document that points out to it? Well, of course, boom, everybody loves it. Well, March of 2002, the archaeologist for the Park Service, she'd taken it to Phoenix and showed it to Bill Flynn, who worked with George Throckmorton on the Hofmann documents. Right. Bill Flynn's not LDS. Then she brings it up to Salt Lake to George Throckmorton, who was my boss at the time in the Salt Lake Police Crime Lab. And so he examining it, taking pictures of everything. And of course, the fun part of it, he knew very well I wanted to see it, be there, but I can't let you see it. You got to sit. So I'm just anxiously going for it. And finally he said, you can come and see it. And he asked the lady, can he see it? Oh yeah, he could have been here all the time, And George was just laughing at me because he didn't. But then the next year in 2003, George and I took a trip down to Lee's Ferry to do an examination of the scene, look at the scroll again, and do a kind of look at the overall environment of Lee's Ferry. And again, with Alan Malmquist there, the fort's locked up, but he has the keys. He's the man with the keys, so we could actually go in. And I took photos and everything, and the examination that he came back with, he and Bill Flynn did, says, this is a forgery. It's a bad forgery. The spelling's bad, the names are spelled wrong. Even how he inscribed his name was printed, because it wasn't cursive, it was printed, isn't the same as
wouldn't it be hard to print or to do cursive on lead?
Yeah, it might be. But Johnny Lee did a lot of printing. There is a rock formation down there in Arizona on House Rock. We call it House Rock. And it's up against House Rock. We call it Signature Rock because the pioneers going through there would graffiti up there. They would carve their names and thing up there. You have to go off the main road. It's kind of hard to find. But again, it's nice to have a Park Service guy lead it. Well, John D. Lee inscribed his name in it, and it's very distinct.
Oh, really?
Well, you compare that.
Is this down by Moab, kind of? Or
no, this is down along the Arizona Strip, right. I think it's still in Arizona.
The Arizona Strip between Utah and Nevada?
Yeah. It's on the Utah side, but it's a couple hours drive from Page.
Okay.
But it's to the west. But you compare that with how he wrote his name on the scroll. Yeah. It's completely different.
Okay.
What George does, he'll take various examples. Here's how John D. Lee did on the rock formation. Here's how he did it in his diary. Here's how he did it in another letter. And then you got the fourth one is what's on the scroll. And you can tell 3 of them are the same. One's not the same. Now.
Okay. Well, the signature clearly looks like a forgery on the scroll.
On thing. And everything was bad about it. Some young man, I can't remember his name, Bunty, I think. He did an examination and said, well, it could be an actual lead plate from that time period, the 1850s or 1860s, whenever. I can't remember the date on it. But we found out that a lot of the major lead was manufactured out in Arkansas and Missouri along the borderline. So a lot of it. But he wasn't sure. It might have been a new. He left the door open, saying it might have been recent manufacture of this lead thing, but we don't know. So it might have been a legitimate piece of lead.
So let me make sure I'm clear on that. So you're saying that back in 1870, let's say, approximate year, that the lead could have come from Arkansas, or it could be a modern manufactured.
But majority of the lead was manufactured in that area, so it would
even in modern times.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
so this isn't something that he would have. That I mean, if John D. Lee had made this, it's not like he just dug a bunch of lead out of the ground and made a lead plate.
They would have had it. Now, there's a lot of stories about it. Number one, well, he didn't have enough paper to write something. He had plenty of things on his diaries and letters and things. In fact, somebody look at his diaries where besides writing, he's writing down the sides and around it. He's using the paper as much as he can. And he had enough paper to write diaries and journals and letters and things like that. The idea that has been presented by Will Bagley, well, this is a very popular thing to do, is write on a lead plate. But I can't find any other example other than this one.
This is the only example of
that I can think of, other than when you look on the internet, it says the gold plates of the Nephites, But we wanted to see if somebody in the Western United States during that time period had actually done that, written on a piece of lead, piece of metal, that we can compare it. Still can't find one.
So this is the only one that exists.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
I will say this, just really quickly. I was in Sandra Tanner's bookstore, and she has a facsimile of the golden plates that are made out of lead plates. And the idea is, you pick it up, it's pretty heavy. And she said gold is even heavier than lead.
Yes.
And so her thing is, there's no way Joseph could have done this. But
anyway,
So there are some. So if any of my readers know Sandra and want to see what a lead plate looks like, you can go to her bookstore.
Right there at the bookstore.
She has one right there.
So anyway, this just some major problems. Bill Flynn determined that the engraving was done with a four-sided nail, but they rarely existed in the American West. They had the two-sided flat nail, but it might have been used with a modern-day nail.
Okay, because whoever inscribed this used a four-sided nail, and in 1870-ish, John D. Lee only had two-sided nails.
Yeah. Okay. Most likely, now there was a four-sided nail invented in the 1870s in France, but not in America. So we're kind of dealing with some questionable.
Yeah.
But then the idea is that this lead plate has been sitting up in the log roof of Lee's Ferry for all these years, and it just kind of fell down. We found it. Well, that's not the case, because at least twice in the previous 20 years before this was discovered in 2003, the Park Service took that roof down and revarnished it to save the wood. So it seems like it just barely got
somebody would have found it.
Yeah. Now, in 1999, this is a couple years before it was discovered, somebody did take we found out they did a archaeological, architectural study, a big multi-page thing that National Park Service did, and somebody took a picture looking into where it was. And Alan Malkin says, well, there it is right there, 1999 photo. There's the lead plate, because that's where I found it and there it was. So I've got a picture of that picture showing where it is. So at least by 1999, it was in the fort, but it didn't come out of the roof. So we're assuming somebody probably just tossed it in there.
Tossed it in there after 1999.
Or before, by 1999, it was tossed in there. And it had been sitting there because, again, nobody was in the fort, and you had dirt piled up here. So it looked like an old beer can or pop can that was just sitting there until Alan Malmquist went in and cleaned it.
So now, was it actually rolled up like a
it was rolled up. Yeah,
oh, okay.
Rolled up. That's why you called it the scroll. Okay. And then they laid it down.
So it wasn't a flat plate like the golden plates. Right?
When they brought it out, it was,
Oh, it was so somebody actually had to unroll it.
Yeah, Alan Malmquist unrolled it, and he cleaned it off, and that's when he found it. It's right now being housed in the vault down at the National Park Service in Page, Arizona. So, and like I said, we saw it up here. We saw it the two other times. I know that when they first had the press conference in 2002, they showed it to the press and everything. But it's a bad forgery, according to George Throckmorton. It's bad. Now, whether it has any connection with one Mark Hofmann, we don't know. Bill Flynn says it's Hoffman-esque. Mark did work with metals because he did some coins and some other items. It was controversial. It was Mormon related. But that's all we got. Now, back in 2002, 2003, I wrote Mark Hofmann when he was in the Point of the Mountain prison 3 different times. I point blank asked him, Mark, did you have anything to do with this? I never got an answer from him. He doesn't have to
He
answer
doesn't
me.
respond to anybody, I've heard.
Yeah, well, few people he has, but rare.
Really?
He has answered some letters. Jack Ford, who was a reporter for the Deseret News during that time, later became the spokesman for the prison.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to him one time. He says, back when he was there, and he said,
There at the prison? Or
at the
there
prison.
At the news?
Yeah, he was a spokesman. He'd get requests from the media 3 or 4 times a month. Can we interview Mark Hofmann? He'd go down and say, Mark, this paper wants to talk to you. He says, no, I don't want to talk to him. He says, happens all the time, but I can't make him talk to anybody. It's up to him.
Right.
I've asked Ron Yankage, his attorney, he says, if I give you a letter that I've written before and he won't answer me, you give it to him? He says, I'll take it to him, but I can't make him answer you. And I think Ron doesn't even think he's his attorney, other than, well, when Mark talks to me, I'll give him some advice, but, I'm not going to make my millions off of being his attorney. So it's one of those things. It's a mystery. Is it a Hofmann? We don't know.
Well, to me, it seemed unlikely that it would be, because the bombings were in 85?
85.
And he went to jail in 86 or 7.
87. January of 87, yes.
And so the earliest that we can even think that this might have gotten in there was about 1999.
Well, the first time we know it's there because of this photo. It may have been there a long time. But
so we have a photo in 1999 that was a photo of just
of the interior of Lee's Ferry, but it's Al Malmquist, who found it, says that's it right there in that photo. So we know at least by 99 it was in the fort. It could have been there a lot longer.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but Bill...
So it could have been sitting there for 15 years.
Yeah, I might have just got there. I asked Shannon Flynn about it. He says, well, as far as he knows, Kirk Bench may have said the same thing. I can't remember, either Shannon or Kirk, that we don't know of Mark ever being down in that side of the state. If we could prove that, here's a receipt from the motel and Page during that time period, wouldn't that be great? But we don't. So we don't know if he went down there. So, and here's the thing. It doesn't have to necessarily be Mark Hofmann that did it.
It could have been somebody else.
It could have been somebody else. It was just, Mark wasn't the first one to do forgeries. He wasn't the one who invented it. He perfected it in a long ways, but there are people, and it's been surmised, and I agree with this idea that there's somebody out there learning from Mark Hofmann's mistakes, and they're going to improve.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm talking with George. He's authenticated Babe Ruth jerseys that have been fake, and
a lot of stuff.
So there's a lot of forgers out there.
Yeah, I just say that Mark improved. He studied up on it. He read about it and improved on that. Mm-hmm. His mistake was, but he got to a point where he got sloppy too. But people wanted so bad to believe what he had was real, they would overlook stuff. As Dean Jesse told George one time, why would anybody want to forge a document? Well, another movie quote. Why would Mark want to do forgeries? Why? A line from Smoking the Bandit. Burt Reynolds is talking to his friend, right, about why we're going from Atlanta, Georgia to Texas to bring some beer back. Why are we doing this? He says, for the all-American life, for the money, for the glory, and for the fun, but mostly for the money. That's Mark Hofmann.
Oh, yeah.
You read his story. It was glory because for 5-6 years there, he was a hero. He was the greatest thing in the Mormon history community. He was getting the press nationwide, worldwide. He admits it was fun fooling people. I loved it. I loved fooling people. And the money was good, except the fact that Mark had a problem. He didn't know how to finance himself well. He spent money he didn't have. That's why he was borrowing money and bouncing checks all the time. And that was his mistake. If Mark had stayed away from the controversial stuff and just said, well, here's an autograph by Joseph Smith or Brigham Young, if he kept doing it, he'd still be doing it today. But he got in the controversial stuff. And he tried to go for the
There's more money in that.
Yeah, opus, the greatest thing here, which was the Oath of the Freeman. And he got to a point, and I think, and George mentioned it, where he had the one guy from Idaho that slapped Mark. I don't care. And he got nervous.
Can you tell us his name?
George never told me.
He wouldn't tell me either.
Because he made 3 Oath of the Freemans. The one that's back in New York,
right.
the one in Idaho, and there's one in Brazil.
Right.
And it's like, Mark got nervous. Part of the thing, too, was the fact that he gave Steve Christian some musician papyrus, which was legitimate. But Steve was going to bring Kenneth Rendell from New York to look at it, and that's where Mark got it from. Now he's panicked because I'm going to be exposed. So he kills people. He kills Steve Christensen, get him out of the way. He plants a bomb at the Sheets home because there was that.
Yeah, he was trying to throw
people off on it. But then the next day, so my friend's killed, blah, blah, blah. I'm supposed to meet with somebody the next day. The person doesn't show up. He takes the bomb back. It goes off in his car up there near where is now the conference center. And what burned him is the fact he thought he could fool people. But this time he says, I got in the car, shut the door, and the bomb went off on me because I just found it there. And the ATF guy says, if that door was shut, you'd be dead. But the door was still open, it just blew you back out. Saved your life. So right off the bat, they're saying, something's not right here. Then they find the bomb parts for the other two were the same ones in his one. Same bomb.
Well, and George told me there were bomb components in the trunk, which I didn't know that either. So
yeah, there was just, when the actual scientists or professionals start looking into it, you can't fool us. You can fool the media, you can fool historians, you can fool collectors, but Right. Well, he goes up to the hospital and he lawyers up on him because the nurse kind of, so he's stuck there. But one day it was, the bombs had something to do with the Christensen Sheets business dealings. Next day, boom. And at first, of course, law enforcement weren't buying into the documents, but the media was, what's Steve Christensen and Mark Hofmann? Well, it's the salamander letter. Mm-hmm. And so they're pushing that idea, and what happens. And of course, then Dean Jesse's the one that calls George. George was working for the Attorney General's office, Wilkinson, and says, well, you're the document guy because you've been trained to do forensic stuff. Can you come take an hour or so and teach me how to do this? No. It takes 3 years. I can't do it. But he gets interested. He starts looking at this stuff. So he gets permission from Wilkinson to go work for the county attorney's office.
Who's Wilkinson? Ernest
Wilkinson Jr.
Oh, Junior. Okay.
Junior. Okay. He was Attorney General for the state for a while.
Oh, really? So the former BYU president's son
was Attorney General in the state back at that time.
Oh, I did not know that. Yeah. Wow.
So Ernie Jr. said, okay. So George gets hired with the county attorney, before they became district attorney, working for Ted Cannon. And then after a few months, Ernie said, I want you back. Well, I got a lot of work here because I got all these documents. And says, well, I'll quit the AG's office. I'll come work there. So now he's hired on as an investigator to work with the documents. He brings in Bill Flynn because in forensic, you always try to have two sets of eyes on things. So he works on all these documents. Now, I don't know if George told you that the problem they had with the church overseeing documents.
Yes, he did.
Okay. The fact is they had to do an end run to Elder Oaks to get permission. Did he tell you about our lunch we had with him, with Elder Oaks?
No, he didn't tell me about the lunch.
Every couple of months, I meet with George at our local Mexican restaurant, and we just talk about things. Hoffman comes up. Well, back in November, we met at this restaurant, and Kirk Bench came with us. So now you got me, my brother, Kirk, and them. Oh, what we talk about? Not talking about the weather or the sports. We're talking about Hoffman. Well, George rehearsed this story about doing an end run, getting permission, or Elder Oaks pushing through so they could look at these documents that the church had acquired from Hoffman. Now, Kirk had never heard that story, so that's a different story. Well, after we talked about this and how great it was, I'm sitting there, and they had their back to it, but the driveway to this restaurant, this car pulls up, this lady's driving it, and this bald-headed guy steps out, turns around and says, that's Elder Oaks right there. So I kind of said, well, what do you know? You're talking about, here's Elder Oaks. Well, they couldn't see him. They're saying, yeah, right, yeah. So, okay, wait till you see him come in the door. A few moments later, here comes Elder Oaks. And we all start laughing. So my brother says, hi, Elder Oaks. He comes over, and we introduce ourselves to him. And George says, maybe you don't remember me. I'm George Throckmorton. I worked on the hospital. Oh, I remember the name. I just didn't remember the face. So we had a nice little talk and kind of teased him. He says, well, you're going to sit with us? No, I have my wife. I got a better offer with my wife because he was driving. So they go down and sit there. Well, it may only take 20 minutes to eat, but we spend 2 hours just talking. So he finally gets up and comes over. I guess maybe now it clicked what was going on. So he's talking to us and high compliments to George, about the work he did and how important part. His wife was there pulling on his sweater like, gotta go. Then Kirk jumps up and says, well, if I bring some books to your office, will you autograph them? He says, well, as long as the books I wrote. And he said, well, it's Carthage Conspiracy. He says, well, we're not supposed to give autographs out, but I can do that for you. And So we had a very nice conversation, and it's so funny. Just we're talking about him. So our ongoing joke now is every time we meet, did you call other Oaks to come have lunch with us? But it's one of those things that that once the science got involved, and once he and Bill Flynn started looking at the documents, this stuff started coming out that the documents do have something to do with this homicide, And then of course, Ted Cannon had a sex scandal going on in the county attorney's office, so he asked to resign. They bring in an old county attorney named David Yoakum to take over, and the first thing he said is, "Clear this case off the desk. It's going to cost too much. Plea bargain it." And that's what he and Bob Stott, lead attorney, will plea bargain it. And of course, at the same time, he's saying, besides plea bargain, I need to cut budget. So George, you're out of here. You're a little man on the totem pole. So George is out the door. After all this work he's done for a year or so on this stuff.
Yeah.
So it was kind of sad, but George has been thank goodness, because eventually he became my boss in the Salt Lake Crime Lab, which one of the highlights of my career was the 10 years I worked with him.
George is great.
Yeah. So that was just the fun stuff.
I still want to. I need to set up another interview because he was talking about the Howard Hughes well.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man.
Well, that and his involvement and stuff, but obviously that put his name out there. A lot of people now, George Throckmorton, I know the name, but what is it? Some people say, Throckmorton, wasn't he involved with Hofmann and his bombings? Well, not with the bombings.
In a roundabout way.
Yeah. But but with having George as my boss for 10 years, he and I have done some presentations like at Sunstone and so forth.
Well, so let me ask you this, because jumping back to the dead leaf scroll. So George, you mentioned two things. Number one, so George says that's a terrible forgery.
Yeah.
Wouldn't Mark Hofmann do a better quality forgery? Isn't that a reason to believe it's not Mark?
Yes and no. Mark did some fabulous jobs on some. Others he did crap. He would crap. He got to a point where he was such a rush to do it. He had one letter that was a legitimate letter in the 1700s, signed Betsy. Just a letter to the family or something. Well, he just had it on Ross. And people bought it. But you look at it, you see the Betsy and the Ross, and it's different ink, different style. But people bought it. Yeah. I owned a document that was a legitimate document that Mark used and made forgeries on it. Maybe we want to talk about that one. Because I have a copy of it sitting right here.
Oh, right here?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Here, let me hand both of those to you.
Okay.
Because that one looks better.
Yeah.
That's a better
these
copy.
are photocopies. In right prior, maybe a year before the bombings, Mark claimed he was getting pieces from what is known as the McClellan collection, papers that belonged to William McClellan. And there's a long story with that. Among the documents was a papyrus and a land deed that had the signatures of Solomon Spaulding and Sidney Rigdon on it. Well, of course, the story of that is the fact that there's always that claim that Sidney Rigdon, being in Pittsburgh, borrowed a manuscript that was written by Solomon Spaulding called Manuscript Found or Manuscript Story, took that to Joseph Smith, and that's how they created the Book of Mormon. Well, the claim was always, even Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith said, I don't know this Solomon Spaulding. I had nothing to do with that. And always been claimed they knew each other. Well, this would kind of give proof they did know each other. So Mark has this document, and he takes it to L.U. Pinnock of the Council of 70 and says, here's this document, it's part of it, but I need some money so I can buy the McClellan collection. So Elder Pinnock calls, I think, First National Bank, says, because I think he was on the board of directors, says, give this guy a loan for $186,000. Of course, the problem with that is Mark fumbled it and couldn't pay it back time enough, so poor Elder Pinnock had to fork up the money to cover it. But this document, about a month later, was sold to Cosmic Airplane for $400 because he needed the money. He was hurting for money. Well, Cosmic Airplane out, they do the investigation. George has it for a year, examining it, gives it back to Cosmic Airplane after the trial.
This is the land deed.
The land deed. In 2000.
This is the land deed. So he sold it for $400,000 that he needed $186,000?
He sold it to Cosmic for $400.
Yeah.
But he got $186,000 on the loan by just showing it to other Pinnock. So that was a lot of money to think. So in January of 2000, the former owner of Cosmic airplane sold it to Ken Sanders, who used to work there, but now had his own bookstore there and sold like Ken Sanders books. Well, he had it on display, and I'm just sitting there just, oh, I love it. But it was like $4,000 he wanted for it. Well, I had enough in a credit card, so I bought it from him.
Oh my goodness!
In August of 2000. So for 4 years, I owned.
So you knew it was a forgery.
Yeah, it sold as that.
Okay.
Immediately I sold it. After I bought it, I take it back to the office and show George, and he showed some things on the document that only he and I know. You know, there's certain things that a document person does. So, but he verified that's the document I examined, and here's this and this. So I owned it for 4 years, showed it at some symposium, and then in 2004, I donated it to BYU. So the document's down at BYU. It was starting to crumble apart. And now the significance of the document is the fact that, here's a photocopy of it.
Okay.
Is the fact that you see that there's names here of, if I do it right.
Well, actually, that other one's easy to read, and plus it's in color.
Yeah. Here we have
I'll zoom in on that.
Sidney Rigdon.
Oh. Okay.
And over here is Solomon Spaulding. It's a Connecticut landing in which a gentleman by the name of Jesse York, and this is back in Connecticut, is selling some of his land to his wife's, Asa Spaulding, wait a minute. Okay, Asa Spaulding is selling some land to his wife's cousin, Jesse York. The problem you have with the document is that Mark made some changes. Besides adding those two names, the original date up here is not 1822, but it's 1792. So Mark changed that.
Yeah, and you can see that. It looks totally scratched out wrong.
And then he also wrote it at the top, 1822.
I don't know if we're going to be able to see that on the video, but...
Okay, the very top. Now on the side down here, there was the original had some squirrely things down here, but he apparently cut it out for some reason. This is a legitimate land deed from 1792. These other signatures are legit. The writing's legit, but he added the names, changed the date.
So he added the name Solomon Spaulding.
Yeah, and Sidney Rigdon.
Sidney Rigdon, okay.
And changed the dates. So anyway, like I said, this was the one that he was able to get money from the bank, and that was a controversy. Now, the fun part is after I bought it, I was making photocopies of it, and on the back of the thing, usually on the back, when they fold it, there's a section where they have some writing when they fold away. Well, I did it in a dark coloring, and you see here in the very back in the middle, there's some writing.
You can't read. You'll have to read it.
Yeah, it's very faint, but even on the original, you can't see it until you darken it up, and it says, deed from Asa Spaulding to Jesse York, 1792. Mark missed it. Didn't see in the back, but it's like, he turns the page over, and you couldn't actually see it with your naked eye until I darkened it up.
Mm-hmm.
So he missed it. This is a document, but he just made some changes on it.
Okay.
And that's what you came with the Bessie Ross, and he probably did others. Now we've had over the years since he's gone to prison some documents. There was one that was a marriage certificate out of Kirkland, signed by Joseph Smith for a Marshall Brewster and a Chloe Smith. Again, my friend Craig Foster, who works at the Family History Library, checked the actual records of the Kirkland marriage book, and there was Chloe Smith, Marshall Brewster, married by Joseph Smith. Now, nothing significant about it, except the fact that this document came from Hofmann. But I'm thinking, back at the time, before his forgeries were uncovered, what if I was a descendant of these people? How much money would I be willing to pay to have the actual document, a marriage certificate? I'd probably be begging all my relatives, we need to have that certificate. That would have made him a lot of money. And we all noticed on this page of these marriages out of Kirkland, 4 or 5 different people. You wonder, did he just do the one, or did he make copies for everybody? So all he did was and he was good at the point that he could do Joseph's autograph. And he was able to age ink, do something to the paper. Now here's the thing, a lot of his forgeries, he would do things to the paper. He'd kind of rip them, have rips in them, or water stains on them, or darken them, or something like that, because it gets to your idea that, well, all old documents are deteriorating and they're crummy. But not necessarily. Down at the archives at BYU, I was shown some of the original handwriting of the sections of the D&C, Doctrine and Covenants. And those papers are preserved. The papers are turning brown, but perfect. No cuts, no water stains, nothing on them. the Whitney family did a good job of taking care of these documents. So not all old documents are beat up, but Mark kind of thought that's what they look like, and people bought into it because they were not sophisticated enough to realize.
Old, then yeah.
So anyway, I for 4 years I had a good time with that one, and
wow.
So those are the involvement. Now there is another one that probably the last one, although I think the people working on Joseph Smith papers last couple of years had one in their collection that they said was most likely a Hofmann. I can't remember the.
Now, let me just back up.
Okay,
I'm sorry to keep going back to that.
That's okay.
Because one of the things you mentioned before we turned the camera on was that both Will Bagley and Richard Turley had used the Dead Scroll in there. Is that in this book here?
I think so. And I can't remember which one Will. But yeah.
Well,
Will had two books. One, he just makes a footnote on it. Another book, he takes this one document. What it is a typed.
So wait a minute.
Yeah.
So if this wasn't discovered until you said 2002, so it was believed legitimate for a while?
It wasn't this document. It was.
No. I'm talking about the scroll.
Okay, yeah.
So because the scroll used in the Turley book?
No.
Oh, I misunderstood that.
Okay. The document we're talking about is this affidavit by a I've forgotten his name. Young man, Edwards, I think his name was. He was 15, and he was at Mountain Meadows.
Oh. So this is a different story.
Yeah. Okay. Different document altogether. This young man was there in 1926. He's been a bishop. He writes an affidavit, supposedly a typed affidavit. Has it signed? He signed it and a judge signed it, talking about being there at Mountain Meadows. Nothing sensational other than he's the last living survivor of Mountain Meadows.
On the Mormon side.
Yeah. So now you have Leonard or the Turley book referencing it in a footnote. One of Will Bagley's references, but another book that.
So what did the document actually say?
It just says I was there. This is what happened. Blah blah blah. It doesn't point the finger at anybody. But it's just
sort of an innocuous document. But it just says he was part of the
there. Yeah, and he literally was. We knew he was there. Well. When this, and in one of the books, Will Bagley quotes the whole letter. Well, when they did a book review on that book, a lady up in Seattle named Polly Aird, independent historian, said, you better think twice about that one. Because she knew the people in the state archives where the document was being held, saying that they'd gotten this document from a guy named Lynn Jacobs, who was one of Mark's associates back during this time. Lynn has since passed away. Well, both the state archives and the church says, I think we ought to look into it. Prior to this, George Throckmorton had spent some time with the archivist up at the church historians department, teaching some fundamentals about forensic document examination. Well, timed right, because now they bring this up there. George comes down, and these archivists up there, people who work with the documents, kind of looked at it where they figured that they saw that this document, which was a letterhead of this particular judge, was a legitimate letterhead piece of paper. But they saw that the signatures were traced. It's a technique of putting the paper on top of a legitimate and then trying to copy it. Well, the coup de grace, the whole thing is they take this document back to New York to a guy named Peter Teitel in the forensic document business. He's the typewriter guy. He does all that work on it. His father was sold typewriters and was a typewriter repairman, so he transferred that over to his own education. So you have a document that has typewriting. He looks at it. Well, he determined. Now this document was supposedly done in 1926. Well, he found out the typewriter used on this document was a 1950 Royal typewriter. So it's like, yeah, and the fact that then also Brent Ashworth, who was one of Mark Hofmann's victims, said, I sold or gave these letterheads to Mark Hofmann. And if there had been anything about Meadows, I would never have given anything to him. So we kind of make that connection. It went from Brent to Mark.
So Brent gave him some blank paper with letterhead.
Yeah.
Mark types it up on a 1950 typewriter.
Yeah. Gives it to Lynn, who then donates it to the state archives. And then,
which Richard Turley and Will Bagley use.
Quote from. Which made...
What a mess.
Yeah. But what it also says is that there are documents out there. Now, I think 1988 or around that time, Mark was pulled out of his cell and being interviewed because there had been stories that he had was trying to hire somebody to bump off some people, like one of the people on the parole board and George Throckmorton. So they're interviewing him. So they did a cell search, and they came up with a one sheet of yellow prison paper where he wrote about on the top, famous Mormons who I've forged, and on the other side, famous Americana I've forged. We look at these names, there's a couple names on there that we don't have documents for. We don't have a forgery or anything related to that. So there are probably documents that are still out there that Mark Hofmann did that they just haven't shown up. So it bequeaths that collectors of documents, whether libraries or something, need to think twice. You need to be careful. Brent Ashford talks about the Emily Dickinson poem. There was a poem that one of the major document auction houses had that was a Hofmann forgery. It was a poem, and they struggle with it. They don't want to admit it, and Brent Ashworth was the one that brought it to their attention that it was a Hofmann forgery. And again, something that comes up after he's gone to prison and everything, but they find these things. In fact, there was a book written on that, The Poet and the Murderer.
Yes.
Was about that particular document. And so the intrigue is still out there. And like I said, that we need to not be so excited when some documents, and that's probably, this is how Mark played the game, because we knew that people had documents, material that an institution didn't have. His claim was, well, I did my backwards genealogy. Instead of going back, I went forward and found the great-grandson of some famous Mormon, i.e. Bullock, and I went to the family and said, I can help you with this, and here comes the Joseph Smith III blessing from the Bullock family up in Colville. But don't bother these people. They want me to be the old go-between. They don't want to be bothered. They don't want to be hassled. Okay. And here's this document, which is, again, each document has their own little history and story. Because a couple years back, the kindness of Brent Ashworth, we released at a Sunstone Symposium a tape recording that Mark made back in the early 1980s when he had this Joseph Smith III blessing, calling the Community of Christ, the reorganized church, saying, I got this document, where he's calling for the church historian. And he reads it to him, and it's an intriguing tape recording that he did. And they're like, wow. And so, great story. I got this. It relates to you. Blah blah blah. I want to trade it for a book of commandments. Yeah, right. And they want it. So they plan on coming out the next week to Salt Lake to do it. Well, before they got out there, he goes down to the LDS Church in Salt Lake, and he trades it with them. So here comes the Community of Christ folk. What the heck's going on here? You double-dealed on us. So there was a story on that one, but this tape recording is great. Maybe you want to do a program with just playing that tape, because it's an hour tape where you hear him playing this little game. He's just bringing these people in, and they're buying this whole thing. The actual document where Joseph is blessing his son to be his successor, which was for a long time part of their policy. And interesting story with that. 1982, Mormon History Association was meeting in Ogden. They had a particular session in the LDS Institute chapel to talk about the blessing. And Mark was up there, This is one time I ever met him. I shook his hand and whatever that you call that, meeting him. Well, as he's telling this story, I did this and this and that. Out in the audience was Richard Howard, who at the time was the church historian for the RLDS Church, who had all these dealings. Well, he was not very discreet in his comment every time Mark would make a comment. And I won't use the full word, but he was going, BS, BS, BS. But use the full word every time Mark said something. And people were out here just chuckling. But they did the smart thing, because actually they took the document and had it authenticated by good professional people, said it's authentic. But the dealings was the fact he double-dealed on him. And he said, we'll never deal with this man again, which saved them a lot of the problems. That it's too bad this stuff wasn't passed on. But part of the problem, too, is people that he dealt with were willing to keep secrets. Don't tell them where you got it from. In fact, you had the Salamander letter that he claimed gave it to Lynn Jacobs, but Lynn claimed he got it. I've got too many documents. Maybe you've claimed. So Lynn went along with it. So he could convince people to do things for him. Brent Metcalf. And I don't blame them that they had some negative or they had some nefarious thing what they're doing, but they were all part of this claim. And you had like Shannon Flynn, Brent Metcalf, and Jacobs were the ones that dealt with him, dealt with there. So and I guarantee you that the police did look at these guys and see if they did anything, but they did nothing.
They sure looked at Shannon. They put him in jail.
Yeah, well, that was over something else. But,
yeah, I know.
But I know that I know because my involvement, because I was in Colorado as a deputy sheriff, I got 2 interviews with Bob Stott and Brent Forbes, Dick Forbes, one of the detectives on it, by phone, and once in office. And their dealings were asking me, and I've told this, so it's nothing like surprising, my knowledge of Lynn Jacobs and Brent Metcalf, because they were friends of mine, what I knew about their involvement with Hofmann. So they were doing their job, kind of trying to connect the dots between Mark, because some people thought that he couldn't have done this alone. One time, Sandra Tanner asked me, could somebody else, I just don't think he could have done this all alone. Well, he did, but he was able to manipulate and use people, and that's the sad thing. It's like, maybe we need to communicate more often to know what's going on.
Yeah.
And so but the tragedy is that, that 2 people died. I get kind of cringe when I hear people on the media or something call him, Mark Hofmann, the forger. No, he's a murderer. Forgery is secondary to all this. And I know that there's a documentary that's being put together, and the Facebook page on is The Forger. Well, okay, we look at that, but no, he's a criminal, he's a murderer, and he's where he needs to be. And most likely he'll die in prison. So.
Not soon enough.
Well, I won't predict. I will just say, he's where he should be.
All right. Well, Steve, I appreciate it. Appreciate you letting me spend so much time with you. And any last thoughts you want to say before we go?
Enjoyed the interview, and I didn't lose my cool, I hope. I didn't swear, so I look forward to it. And maybe down the road more stuff comes up. And like I said, I collect this stuff not to hide it away or keep it secret, but to be used by scholars and researchers and things like that. So eventually it'll all go to BYU, and so look for the Mayfield collection down there.
All right, will do. Well, appreciate you spending your time here on Gospel Tangents. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this throwback episode with Steve Mayfield. As I said, Steve, we miss you. Since Steve just mentioned his collection, and he said it was going to be at BYU, there was actually a change in that, so I thought I would just let you guys know. Apparently, Steve wanted to keep the entire collection together, and he went through his few different libraries, and they just wanted bits and pieces of it. And so he actually donated that to the Apostolic United Brethren Archive in Draper or Bluffdale, Utah here. And so if you're interested in seeing Steve's collection, you're going to have to go to the AUB archive. So anyway, just thought I would share that little last tidbit. That was just announced right before Steve's death. So once again, Steve, we'll miss you. And just going to these conferences won't be the same without you. Thanks for listening, and I hope you continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.